Good morning everyone, and welcome to the Petroleum Safety Authority Norway and today's webinar about the Norwegian safety regime. My name is Heidi Stabenfeld and I have the privilege of hosting this event today. The objective of this webinar is to increase knowledge about the Norwegian safety regime. This regime is unique in its form, and in order for it to work, it's essential and crucial that all parties involved both understand it and adhere to it at all times. But what exactly is the Norwegian regime and what makes it unique? What's the role of the PSA in this regime? And what are the responsibilities of the oil companies? These are some of the questions we will answer today. And should you have any questions during this session, feel free to submit them via email to the email address shown on your screens now. And we'll have a short Q&A session later on. To start off the day, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Sigve Knudsen. Sigve has been with the PSA and prior to that the NPD for over 21 years and is our Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs here at the PSA. He will open this webinar on behalf of the PSA and subsequently give his lecture on the PSA's role in administering the Norwegian petroleum sector. Please welcome Sigve Knudsen.
Thank you for your kind introduction, Heidi. This webinar is about the safety regime in the Norwegian petroleum activities, as you said. And what is it about this regime? Is it unique? Is it robust? What does make it robust? And is it complicated? I will start with a few thoughts on the question whether this regime is unique or not. The regime was unique when it was established many years ago, and many people looked to Norway both with wonder and with great interest. The oil and gas industry started here in this country in the late 60s, and the regime has developed over the years. But there is a point in time which defines a big change and a new direction, and that is the Alexander Kielland disaster in 1980. We will come back to that. Alexander Kielland was a game changer for the regime, and as I said, we will come back to that later on in the webinar. The new way of thinking at that time was based on completely new principles, both in terms of regulations and the role of the authorities. We went from detailed regulatory approach to a function-based approach. And we went to a much clearer position of responsibility. It's the owners of the operations who also owns the risks and must have the responsibility for safety. Many countries operate after the same principles, but we still see that there is great interest in our regime and how we do it in Norway. Then to the question whether it's complicated or complex regime. It's probably a rather complex regime with both its strengths and weaknesses. And as I said, it is built on the use of function-based rules, a clear placement of responsibility, and it's also built on trust. Trust and collaboration can be both difficult, and at least there is some vulnerability in it. The regime can also be challenged when there are major changes going on, like big change processes, generational change, changes in the player's picture, major technological changes and developments. Both the parties in the petroleum activities and the politicians have discussed the strengths and the weaknesses of this regime several times, and most recently in the process with the white paper number 12 in 2018. The conclusion is clear. We have a robust and well-functioning regime, but it must be maintained and adapted to the development that takes place in the industry. We believe that it is a flexible regime. It allows adapting to changes. It's not the case that if we have a low oil price, that we have to change the regime. Flexible items like an elastic band can break if we stretch it too hard. And it's the same with the regime actually. The flexibility can be stretched too hard, and we can damage the regime as such if we don't pay attention to its prerequisites. One of the most important prerequisites of the regime is competence. That you have competence about the regime, understand it, and why it is like it is. You know the history, and not at least understand the strengths and the weaknesses that exists. There is always a need to boost knowledge about this, and that is what this seminar is about. And it is a result of one of the recommendations in a report from a tripartite group that was made prior to the mentioned white paper. The parties agreed that there was a need for knowledge development in this area. And the parties together were given the task to develop a program for today's webinar. It is arranged in both Norwegian and English, and it was arranged for the first time last year. The work with this has been coordinated by the PSA. This seminar will provide basic insights to understanding of and what the regime is like, especially the development of the Norwegian regulations, and it will also provide insight into PSA's role, and not at least how the parties work together to improve the level of safety. We target this seminar to managers, decision makers, safety representatives, union representatives. Yes, it's actually relevant for most people who work within this industry. And with this opening, and on behalf of PSA, I warmly welcome you to this webinar. And then we move on to the first presentation, which is on the PSA's role, and the first speaker out is me. I'm going to give you a lecture on the PSA's role in administering the petroleum sector. And as I said, knowledge of the Norwegian petroleum regime is important and must be regularly put on the agenda as today. The reason for this is that it keeps this business safe. And keeping this business safe is very important for all of us. And therefore, there are many who care and many who has interests in this industry, from the Prime Minister to the man on the street. To wake you up a little bit on the risk potential in the industry, I can show you statistics, I can show you figures, trends and graphs, but there are better ways of communicating this message. So let's go back to Piper Alpha on the British sector in 1988 and take in the pictures of a nightmare and a worst-case scenario.
Mayday! Explosion and fire on the Piper platform. All personnel abandoned.
Bloody hell, it's really on fire, isn't it?
Yeah, it's spreading already.
01 Tharos, the situation is that the platform is completely on fire from sea level to top. We have in fact pulled back somewhat. The structure is collapsing and it is total fire. We are continuing to spray water on it.
The risk picture in the petroleum industry is dramatic. We are talking about possibilities that a major accident can occur with terrible consequences for people, the environment, and also material and economic values. We also talk about possible work-related illnesses and injuries for people working in the industry. For example, from noise, chemical exposure, musculoskeletal or psychosocial stress. In history, there are, unfortunately, events that illustrates this, and the experiences from them have often been soul-stirring. But one has also made sure to learn from them. And it is therefore obvious that strict requirements must be set for those responsible for this industry. It's also obvious that competence about HSE must be on a top level, and it's also obvious that the state has a strong interest in this industry. And all this helps to explain the regime and the role of the PSA, to which we will come back to later. But first, a little bit more about the state management of the petroleum activities in a broader picture, but centered around the management of health, environment and safety. The Norwegian state has major interests in the petroleum industry because it is a very important source of income and revenue for the state. There are potentially major negative consequences to it, and this kind of business requires control. This has been the case throughout a time we have had the business here in Norway, and there will be more about this in the next lecture, which is more historical, in a more historical perspective. Of course, you know the roles of the parliament, and you also know the roles of the government. In Norway it's called the Storting and the Regjering. The government is governed by our Prime Minister and the heads of the ministries, the ministers. The Parliament is the legislative body and the government is the executive body. The Parliament and the government are two of the three parties in the distribution of power in the state. In addition, we have the judicial body, which is the Supreme Court and the courts. This part is not included in this presentation today, but it's clear that in the event of serious breaches of the regulations, you can quickly get in touch with that part of the state administration as well. Most ministries have some form of interest in the petroleum industry, and we cannot go through all of that, but this map places the most central interests viewed from a HSE perspective. I will go through this briefly, and then we will dive into the PSA and safety axis of this in much more detail later on. The Ministry of Petroleum and Energy is the leading sector ministry for the business and is responsible for resource management. The Norwegian Petroleum Directorate reports to this ministry, and the Petroleum Directorate and the PSA are separated as agency, even though we are neighbors physically here in Stavanger, and we have previously been one and the same agency. We will return to that also later. Under MPE, we also have the management of the state interests that lies with players like Petoro, Gasco and Equinor. MPD has a similar seminar to this one, where they explain the regime from their responsibility. The Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs is the PSA ministry, and that is the yellow one in the slide. Under PSA, there are also the Norwegian Labour Inspection Authority, the Norwegian Institute for the Working Environment, and also the Labour Court and the Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration, and even more. The Norwegian Environment Agency is responsible for external environment management in the petroleum activities, and they report to the Ministry of Climate and Environment, as you see. We have heard a lot, and you probably have all around the world heard a lot from Ministry of Health and Care Services recently concerning the pandemic. In this area, in the petroleum area, the Directorate function and the supervisory functions have been divided between the Norwegian Directorate of Health, and which is responsible for the regulations, and the Health Inspectorate, which is responsible for carrying out inspections and supervisions. For the petroleum activities, this part is delegated to the county governor of Rogaland. Under this ministry, we also have the Norwegian Radiation Protection Authority, which has a role in the petroleum activities as well. We have a joint set of regulations in the petroleum sector between Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs, Ministry of Climate and Environment, and the Ministry of Health and Care Services, and the supervisory authorities just mentioned below them. Further on, the Norwegian Maritime Directorate has an important role in the business, both historically but also today, especially when it comes to the use of mobile rigs, facilities and vessels, and they are under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. The same applies to the Directorate of Fisheries, which has interest in the fisheries and petroleum interface. The Norwegian Coastal Administration has a role in connection with emergency preparedness and also in the event of accidents and discharges that requires national emergency preparedness efforts, and they are also responsible for the marking of facilities. Under the Ministry of Justice, we find, for example, the main rescue center, the police, the Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection, and PSA cooperate with all of these as well. And the last one on your right side of the picture is the Ministry of Finance, which obviously has a major interest in this large source of income for the industry. There is much more that could be mentioned here, and there are many other bodies that could be mentioned, but this illustrates my main point. The state has many interests and many eyes on this business. And on the HSE side, PSA is a coordinating authority and works closely with many of the underlying agencies in this picture here. The state ownership interests in the petroleum activities shall, as a whole, be managed in the best possible way for the society. The objectives of the various agencies complement each other's. They emphasize the specific responsibilities of the relevant agency and shows that, overall, we must all contribute to the same thing, a safe management of great values for the society. And this is very clear if you read, for example, both PSA and MPD's overall goals. They are quite similar, but they start at different ends and meet each other in a whole. PSA's overall goal is to set the terms for and follow up that players in the industry maintain a high level of health, safety and the environment and emergency preparedness, and thereby also contribute to creating the highest possible value for society. And then, on the other hand, if you read the overall goal of the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, they shall contribute to the greatest possible value from the oil and gas activities to the Norwegian society through efficient and responsible resource management. Health, safety and the environment and other uses of the sea are important considerations in this work. So the PSA goal starts with health, safety and environment, and the NPD goal starts with resource management, and they all sort of merge together in a goal that is to manage the best possible way for society, both health, safety and environment, and economical values. Then we must move further down the HSE track. The government ambition in this area is indeed ambitious. It is that the Norwegian petroleum activities shall be world-leading in HSE performance. This ambition is clear, and it's a clear signal to the industry that you cannot take a high level of safety for granted. But you must work for continuous improvement all the way. It is also an expression that it is a disaster for this country if we have a major accident or otherwise fail to take care of people who work in this industry, or fail to take care of the environment or the material values that the industry stands for. This ambition is expressed several places, including the latest report to the Parliament on the HSE and the petroleum activities, which you see on the picture here on the right side, the white paper number 12. Between these three mentioned values, the priority is clear. First, personnel, people, then the environment, than financial values. That's a very important principle in the regulation of this industry here in Norway. It does not appear from our name that PSA is also a directorate. We are both a directorate and a supervisory agency. It is of course clear from our overall objectives that I showed you earlier, and our role description and our mission. We are perhaps best known for our supervisory role, so I would like to zoom a little bit in on the directorate role now. A directorate is a central state administration body that develops and manages and distributes knowledge about its area of competence. The directorate function involves also regulatory development. It also includes giving, advising the ministry, and it's therefore often that directorates operate in the field between politics and professional competence, authority and expertise, and decisions and actions. But we have to be clear on that. We do not engage in politics. We are an executive professional authority. And since we have both directorate and supervisory agency tasks, we sort our tasks into these four main areas or sections that you see on the left side here, which is regulatory development. In collaboration with the parties and the other authorities, we maintain and develop the regulations that are set down for the business when it comes to health, safety and environment. We also give professional advice to the ministry in connection with hearings, reports to the parliament, reports, statements and so on. The supervision part of it, we will come back to that later on, but that is auditing basically auditing the industry. And we also have responsibility for information and guidance to the players in the industry and to the general public as well. This seminar is an example of giving information out to the public. Back to the directorate role, when it comes to directorates, we see that they may have different degrees of delegated authorities, and different degrees of professional independence in relation to the superior ministry. It can be fully subject to ministerial management, control and instruction, or it could be completely professionally autonomous with the framework of the laws in relation to the ministries. And PSA is probably more the latter category. And in order to be able to execute our role, we depend on trust and credibility in relation to the public. And we also depend on a high level of expertise to be able to make good professional assessments that provide high legitimacy. The three categories you see below on the lower part of this picture is the headlines that you will find on our website. And they actually sort of group our main activities in a slightly different way than the ones on the left side, but they are more or less the same. And if you go to our website, you can read more about our work with regulations, our work with supervision, and other more technical subjects. And I just want to give you, just wanted to show you that because our website, you will find a lot of information about who we are and what we do and how we do it. And my recommendation is that you make this website one of your favorites, actually, and also recommend that you subscribe to the news that come from that website. We have a lot of followers, and of course we want we always welcome more. That was very short about our main tasks. We'll come back to some of them later, and here you see who we are targeting. And as you see, our work goes out in different directions. It's a very simplified picture, though. Not everything is included here. For example, cooperation with other authorities, both nationally and internationally, is an important part of our work. But the main axis goes from our principal, the ministry, through us and out to the companies, the responsible player in the industry. I will try to explain that. So let's start with the ministry. We get our objectives and our requirements from the ministry. We are, of course, in dialogue with them when designing this, because we know we have the detailed knowledge about the business and the risk picture, and we also supply them with guidance in that matter. The most important requirements and instructions from the ministry for our work are these. They are the primary guiding principles for exercising our authority. Briefly explained, there is something that is more permanent and there is something that is more annual. The PSA was established in 2003, and prior to that we were part of the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, but we will come back to that. But with the establishment of us as a separate agency in 2003, that is described in a resolution from that year. In addition to that resolution, we have an instruction from our ministry with general requirements that are set down for us. The proposition number 1 is an annual proposition to the Parliament. It's the state budget every year, and the annual allocation to the PSA, and the overall description of our goals is described in that one. And every year we also get an annual steering letter from the ministry. This is based on and refer to this proposition number 1, and further specifies the financial framework for PSA and set out our priorities, objectives and reporting requirements for the relevant year. The annual letter, together with the instruction, governs our activities and indicates which areas have the highest priority every year. And of course, we cannot plan for everything and specify everything in documents like this. So PSA must also have the flexibility to take on new tasks at short notice. For example, whether it is from the ministry, a result of changes in the industry, or incidents and other types of unforeseen issues. In addition to this, we have our own strategies, such as the annual supervisory strategy that complements and specifies the overall governing documents. But let's take a look at the annual steering letter. This expresses the so-called performance objectives for PSA. These are further detailed, but I will come back to that. But objective number 1 is that risk of major disasters in the industry shall be reduced and kept to a minimum, and we shall contribute to that. Objective number 2 is that the players in the oil and gas industry shall improve the performance within preventive working environment, health and safety, and ensure sound working conditions. We shall contribute to that. And the objective number 3 is describing other prioritized areas like development of knowledge, regulatory development, party cooperation, ICT security, and digitalization. So, but the objective 1 and objective 2 is also further detailed in some areas that should be given special attention and priority. For Objective 3.1, these are in 2020. These are risks associated with well control, hydrocarbon leaks, construction incidents, ICT security, and also security in general. For the Objective 3.2, it is systematic preventive work to reduce work environment risk related to physical, chemical exposure, organizational and psychosocial work environment, and ergonomics. And there is also a second one, which is prevention of personal injuries related to lifting and crane and lifting operations, falling objects, and handling of equipment. So that is our main objectives for detailed out and specified for 2020. And we will receive a new annual letter for 2021 in January. The other end of that axis we started off with the ministries is the players, the responsible parties, the responsible players for running the business. These are the ones that we supervise. And just to take you into that one, who they are, we will start with a short video that addresses the placement of responsibility. And you have probably already realized that I'm talking a lot about responsibility, and that is a very important principle in this regime. And the video that I show, the videos that I show in my presentation is also available on our website, so you can go back there and find them if you need them later on. So we start off with a short video that explains the responsibility for safety in the petroleum activities.
Each company is responsible for the safety of its own operations. Only the individual player has the necessary detailed knowledge, decision-making authority, and not least resources to ensure that the regulatory requirements are met. The PSA is responsible for setting parameters for the industry's activities and for following up that these are conducted in a prudent manner. It is responsible for ensuring that an integrated approach is taken to regulation of the industry and seeks to ensure that regulatory development keeps up with general trends in the sector. It is neither possible nor desirable for the government to control the industry in detail. Detailed regulation could undermine, for example, the perception by the companies of their responsibility.
This next slide shows our area of responsibility geographically. It's from the north of Norway to the south. It's from the west to the east, but it's actually mostly to the southwest. And it is mostly petroleum activities, but we have recently also been given and delegated the responsibility for CO2 transport and storage, and also for renewable energy production at sea, like offshore wind. The players in the industry are licensees, operators, owner of mobile facilities, and other contractors and suppliers. And we can address the entire chain of players if we like, including contractors, including subcontractors and suppliers. But the main emphasis is on the operators and the owners of the mobile facilities. And that is also natural due to the overall and operational responsibility they have. We supervise different types of facilities like fixed installations, mobile facilities, subsea facilities, pipelines, wells, and also land facilities. And we do so in all phases of the industry, from cradle to grave, design, construction, operation, decommissioning, and removal. In order to be able to follow up these players, we must be set up with an organization that matches the industry. Our 6 key professional areas are therefore occupational health and safety, drilling and well technology, HSE management, structural integrity, logistics and emergency preparedness, and also process integrity. These areas are led by a section head who reports to the Director of Professional Competence in PSA. And I will show you the organizational chart on the next slide. These key disciplines also contains competence areas that is not shown by the name of the discipline, like for example electro, which is a part of process integrity, and other areas that are covered by the disciplines. This is the organization as a whole. PSA is headed by our Director General, which is Anne Myrvold, and the organization has a total of about 180 employees distributed across this organization map. We are divided into 5 main areas, and they are professional competence, supervisory activities, legal and regulatory affairs, internal support and development, and also communication and public affairs. They are headed by directors of the areas, and there are different types of units, teams and disciplines in each area, and we'll come back to some of them. Professional competence is led by our director for that area, Mr. Finn Karlsen, and is divided into the 6 central competence areas that I showed you on the previous slide. Supervision is led by 2 supervision directors that are sharing the portfolio of players between them. And supervision is divided into 6 supervision teams that are organized according to the players and shown here on this slide. There's 1 team for Equinor offshore activities. There are 2 teams for the other operators and licensees. There is 1 team for onshore activities and 1 for floating production units and drilling contractors, and also 1 for other contractors. And they are headed by a head of supervision, and there is also a contact person in each team, which has the responsibility for the communication with the players within the portfolio of the team. These teams are interdisciplinary manned with people from the professional areas, as I showed you earlier. So we can say that the 2 departments, professional competence and supervision, work together as a matrix. Then we have gone through the first 2. The third area is legal and regulatory affairs, which is the area that the department that I am heading. This department is responsible for the results of our legal work, regulatory development, and participation in standardization work, and also large parts of the management dialogue with the ministry and other directorate tasks. Internal support and development is our internal support functions as human resource management, document center, finance, ICT, and so on. Communication and public affairs is responsible for external communication, the different channels, and also media management. And this department typically contributes a lot with the facilitation of seminars like and webinars like this one. Supervision includes all activities that give us a basis for assessing and following up the companies and following up that they run their business prudently and in line with the regulations. Supervision includes, for example, audits and verifications of facilities, also dialogue and meetings with the industry, data collection on risk, accidents and incidents, investigation of incidents, accidents, processing and consent applications of different kinds, assessment of development plans, acknowledgement of compliance for mobile facilities, player assessment and license awards, and also use of enforcement tools and powers, which I will come back to later. But I think again, it's time for a new video, which says a little bit more about how, and give examples on how we perform our supervisory activities.
Safety in the petroleum industry is based on trust. Even if the regulator has trust in a company, audits are needed to check how it fulfills its obligations. An audit covers more than verifications offshore or on land. Meetings with management and employees are important to ensure that everyone's views are expressed. Random checks are made at points with the highest risk. It is neither appropriate nor possible to check everything on a facility. The goal is to make sure that the company itself is taking responsibility for safety by reducing risk as much as possible.
Okay. This slide repeats actually some of what was said in the video. It's kind of summarizing the main principles in the supervisory methodology. Supervision is directed at the responsibility of the players to comply with regulations. Supervision is exercised in the form of system audits and verifications. The scope and the content are determined by our overall experience, relevant activities, and so on. Audit findings are concentrated on improvement points in the enterprise's management systems. The supervision is based on our knowledge of risk, and there's therefore a great attention on knowledge development through both the professional axis and the supervision axis in PSA. Knowledge of risk is a prerequisite for contributing to risk reduction. It has not always been like this. And as I said in my introduction, the regime and also the supervisory strategy has developed over time. Very briefly explained, and we will come back to this later on, but very briefly explained, the supervisory approach has changed over time from a detailed regulation and a detailed approach to a more management and functional based approach. We have gone from specific requirements to more performance-based requirements. We have gone from detailed inspections to more system-oriented audits. And we have gone from detailed orders to more solution-oriented enforcement and dialogue. There is actually a very important rationale behind this, and Paul will come back to that later on. But understanding this is essential to understanding the regime and why we are where we are today. I said earlier that our supervision is also about the use of enforcement powers. When we find violations of the regulations, we react. And roughly speaking, we have a set of statutory and non-statutory enforcement tools, like you see in this picture here. In short, our strategy is that we should try to solve as much as possible on the lower steps of this staircase. And that is, of course, if the conditions allows for that. But the seriousness of the cases should lead us up the stairs to use stronger reactions, such as orders and what is even stronger. So this is the strategy, increasing order of severity, stronger enforcement tools, but our supervisory strategy says try to solve it on as low as possible level. But again, the severity is a very important factor in that consideration. So the use of reactions is carefully considered, in those cases where it is relevant to take it into use. Just a few words about the regulations. The regulations are based on functional requirements that tells what to achieve and guide on how to achieve it. This gives the industry the freedom to choose good solutions, and it also facilitates technological development. But it stresses the placement of responsibility, and that is again very important. The guidelines to the regulations refers to norms and industry standards that provides predictability for the users and indicates the expected standard of the solution and HSE level. But this is not a regulatory seminar or course, and I want to emphasize the need for regulatory competence and point to other places where you can get that. A good place to get it is through what we call RVK. RVK stands for Regelverkskompetanse in Norwegian and is an association of key parties in the business to increase competence on the HSE regulations for the petroleum industry in Norway, and also to provide and facilitate for the provision of training. Since 2001, the Norwegian School of Management, in collaboration with the RVK steering group, has developed courses for the petroleum industry. And during these years, many thousand people have participated in such courses. RVK is based on a tripartite collaboration between the authorities, the employers, and the employees. And the RVK courses have been developed for various professional groups and shows how the regulations apply in all phases of the industry activities. The lecturers of these courses are among the most experienced, and they continuously acquire first-hand knowledge of the regulations and upcoming changes. So these courses are really up to date. If you feel a little bit insecure about the regulations in the petroleum industry, get yourself on a course. The two-way and the tripartite cooperation is essential for the business and the current regime. And I can't emphasize this enough. The most important areas or arenas for tripartite collaboration is the safety forum, the central tripartite arena for HSE in the petroleum industry. Focus on debate and the cooperation on important safety issues. It's a consultative body, it's a driving force, and an initiator of collaborative projects. And then we have regulatory forum, a forum for information, discussion, advice and feedback on the work with the development and maintenance of the framework documents. Exchange of views on the content of and the experience with the regulatory work. Very important forums, both safety forum and regulatory forum, and they are both headed by PSA. Working together for safety is a forum for developing of best practice documents. The Trends and the Risk Level project is also a key tripartite collaboration. In the Norwegian version of this seminar, we present that in more detail. The English version is a shorter one, and for those of you who are particularly interested in the risk level project, I must refer you to our website, which explains this more in detail. But that is a project that every year summarize the risk picture for the industry based on a set of parameters. Another example is the RVK, which I just talked about just a few minutes ago. So these are the main and most important areas for tripartite cooperation. The two-way cooperation within the companies is of course also important and sort of a cornerstone as well in the internal management of HSE in the companies. So now we've talked a lot about PSA, also a lot about other players and the regime, and I'm coming to an end by emphasizing and summarizing some of the main features of the regime. I've talked a lot about raising awareness of the company's responsibilities, and that is the most important thing with this regime. A clear responsibility and a great motivation for maintaining a high level of HSE is a very important driving force for the results to go in the right direction, which is nothing less than continuous improvement. Tripartite collaboration, just talked about it, a cornerstone of the regime to be able to come up with good solutions, but also a kind of watchdog against the flexibility and the freedom that the regime represents. Trust and openness. Trust because we have faith in the model, in the companies, in the motivation. Trust in that the proximity to the risk provides the best prerequisites for dealing with it. The belief in an authority supervision in addition to, not instead of, the company's own follow-up. Trust also because we have a robust regime with a strong 2- and 3-party cooperation. Openness to learn and spread important knowledge that everyone benefits from. As I said, frames and flexibility, and back to my elastic rubber band in the introduction, the regime has its limitations, it has its rules of the game. These can be stretched. It is allowed to disagree, it is allowed to challenge the authorities, it is allowed to discuss. That can contribute to good solutions. But it requires respect for each other's roles and responsibilities, and also respect for the boundaries and the limits of the stretching. So how we solve our issues affects safety. It affects cost and it affects reputation, and it will, and it also affects what kind of model we will end up eventually. Too much pressure on this model will reject it, and politicians and others who decide will push for change. And what is the alternative? You will see from the historical lecture later on, after me, that alternatives to today's model have been tried before, and there are good reasons why we ended up where we are today. We have already seen and tried some alternative regime models in our history. So we do not know what the future brings, and what need for adjustments will arise. But so far, as said in my introduction, we have assessed and we have discussed the strengths and the weaknesses of our regime many times. And the conclusion is clear. It is a broad agreement that the regime is robust and well-functioning, and must be maintained and adapted to development. We have made this small booklet to summarize the main features of the Norwegian regime. And it explains some of the things that I have been talking about now. It's available both in paper and online, and you are free to order it from us. The information is given on the slide. To end my presentation, I just want to tell you a little bit about our main issue for 2002. We've had the industry here, like I said, from the 60s. We have learned a lot. We mark this year, 20 years, since the largest of our accidents, the Alexander Kielland accident. We have the industry for more than 50 years, and we have learned a lot about it and about how good safety develops. The ambition for continuous improvement will and must shape the future of our industry. And it's a joint responsibility among the companies, employees, and the authorities. And therefore we ask this year, how can we continue to learn and apply what we have learned? What changes and new measures are your company and your organization implementing to reduce risk of loss of life? How should we work to prevent another major accident? And finally, we ask, what does this mean for you? My last slide, an invitation to follow us. It's easy to get close. We offer a lot of opportunities to become friends with us, and please do so. Thank you for your attention. I don't know, Heidi, are there any questions?
Yes.
There are.
Thank you so much for your thorough presentation on, in particular, the PSA's role in this rather complex system. I'd like to dwell a little bit about the 2- and 3-partite collaboration. Because you mentioned that you put a lot of effort into this collaboration.
Yes.
Could you elaborate a little around why this is so important and also how it's strengthening the regulatory system?
Yes. It is very important that everyone engage and take responsibility and contribute to be able to reach and maintain a high level of safety. The different parties fill each other out. They have different roles, they have different perspectives, and they are able to challenge the discussion from many sides, and that's very good. So in that way we get a broad approach to the discussions. It is important that the different viewpoints come forward before decisions are made and before plans are laid down. And the responsible party has to ensure that issues related to health, safety, and environment have been comprehensively and adequately addressed. Actually, and that's the main reason for the 3-partite collaboration. So bringing up all sides of the story is the basic feature and basic meaning of it.
Yeah. I'd also like to take us back to one of your slides on where you talk about mirroring the industry.
Yes.
And I'm curious.
With our competence.
With our competence. Why is that so important? And how have you reached the disciplines that you're currently focusing on?
Yes. We need to be at the same level competence-wise as the industry, because the industry is very competent, and we need to match them. And competence is key to all we do. Competence is key to understanding risk. Competence is key to develop regulations. Company is key to discuss with the industry on the same level, so that we are able to challenge them, not at least. So to be able to audit the industry, we need to know the details in the subject that we are supervising. We also need detailed competence to be able to make regulations that fit, and we also need detailed competence to be able to participate in detailed standardization work in the industry, and to give, and not at least to give guidance to our ministry, because our ministry doesn't have detailed competence on the petroleum industry. That is us as their advisors to have. Therefore we often recruit from the industry, and also people with long experience from the industry, and that is very important for us. And the key disciplines in our organizations are sort of based on our knowledge of risk and what is the challenges in the industry. And we must always be able to be dynamic on that and build up our competence in the areas where we see the need to follow up. Yes, so that is why it looks like it is today. and it has been slightly changed over years, and we see new areas coming in with being more and more important, like for instance ICT security, which has come the recent 10 years, and we have built up competence on that. So this is how we work. We work risk-based, and we also build up our organization with competence to be able to challenge the industry on the most important HSE issues.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, everyone, we'll take a short break and resume again at 10:20 sharp.